Hey guys, this is Michael Hernandez, and you are watching Rumble Book Club. So, I was really hesitant to do this book review. Um, there's a lot of content in it that is extremely mature, and I've done mature books before, but everything from the title, the contents, the language used, the subject matter, everything in this book um, has some really, really dark aspects when it comes to human psychology. So, the book we're discussing today is called A Billion Wicked Thoughts, and it's written by Sai Gaddam and Ogi Ogas. So they teamed up, and these are two. I guess after the publication of this book in 2011, it became something of a social science phenomenon. It became the book itself became compared to a lot of the famous sexology books of the 21st century, or the 20th century and the 21st century, and it got a lot of attention. But regardless of that, regardless of how much attention this book got and how revolutionary the book supposedly was, it is actually relatively hard to find. A first edition copy is, I've seen it up there in hundreds as far as its cost. I happen to get a copy just through my Nook. I don't get too many books through my Nook, but this was one that, considering the title was kind of provocative, I figured it'd be easier just to keep it in my Nook, where it's just kind of folded up in this neat little package. The cover itself, like I said, is meant to be kind of seductive. It's got a conglomeration of a bunch of photos of just people's faces, but when you zoom out, it's in the shape of a womanly form, and it's meant to be kind of seductive, and I didn't feel comfortable having a paper copy. First of all, to read just out in public, that's just kind of lewd. I didn't like the thought of that, but also I didn't like the thought of displaying that here on YouTube, where I know you can specify your audience, but not your audience isn't always in your control. So I'm gonna do my best to keep this first ever live episode of Rumble Book Club relatively clean, despite the fact that this content matter is very mature. So the book itself is premised on the fact that men and women perceive their romantic impulses very differently. They have different cues that they respond to. There are different things that they look for, and there are different things that are effective in gaining the affection between men and women, which is something I feel like we've all known for centuries. But this book really went granular by going into internet data, which is something that prior books, prior studies on the differences between men and women and how they respond romantically to each other wasn't done before. So what Garam and Ogus were able to do was they were able to deep dive mountains and mountains of evidence of people's search history online. So that kind of brings me to my first point, which is the fact that anyone who's trying to search explicit content online, if you think you're alone, you aren't. I promise you. There are people watching. There's this old saying about the internet, where if the product is free, that's not true. You're the product, and that's the same with illicit material online, including porn. So if you are consuming this, and the general audience I'm speaking to particularly is men, because they tend to be the biggest consumers of illicit online material. If you're watching this, someone is also watching you when you are watching that kind of content. So the fact that they were able to so easily pull people's search history is should be quite frightening. It should be something that forces everyone to kind of reevaluate what exactly you're searching online. Are you looking at something that you'd be proud of other people seeing that you tried to look up? Now, I get it. We all have kind of weird things we want to know, weird questions we want answered. But when you're pursuing things that you know are illicit, someone is watching, someone is keeping track of that. Data is being compiled on you, where you are, who you are, everything about that, which should be a cause of alarm. But either way, as a result of that data being out there and Garam and Ogas being able to pull that data, they were able to unfold all this research. And the main target, like I said, was to discern the difference of how the male brain works versus how the female brain works. And what they were able to generally pull from all this data was the fact that men respond very much visually, which is, I think, one of the oldest understandings of human nature, is the fact that men respond visually to what we see. And that includes romantically through, to use a euphemism, marital impulse. So men tend to see certain signs and triggers, and that causes us to respond physically and also mentally, emotionally. So those two are very much linked, and it's very easy to kind of trick the male brain. There's not too many reservations within the male mind when it comes to those impulses. But when it comes to women, it's a little more ingrained in a separation between how they respond physically and how they respond mentally, emotionally. Those are two distinct things. Those are two distinct areas where a woman could be receptive physically to stimuli, but not receptive when it comes to mentally and emotionally. So those are two very distinct needs, and that can cause the entire romantic interlude to shut down. This is something that they Ogas and Gaddam reinforce by showing what women are looking for. So whereas men are searching for visual stimuli online, women in a lot of cases are looking for mental emotional stimuli by searching up not videos and pictures like men are, but they're looking up storylines. They're going on to chat forums and having long discussions that are surrounded, that are focused on roughly the same content, but it's framed in a very different way. It's not framed in a physical manner. It's framed in a very emotional. It's cued to the emotions that are going on. So another thing that the two authors really focus on are the extent of human depravity. So the fact that whether it's men or women, they don't restrict themselves simply to what is necessary to procreate or feel a sense of instantaneous pleasure, but there tends to be a rise, an escalation in what needs to be found, what needs to be unearthed in order to reach that same level of satisfaction. Again, I'm trying to speak as specifically, but also as appropriately as possible. But similar to the way that if you were to consume a certain amount of sugar products, if you were to eat that same product over and over again, you would require more before you get that same dopamine spike, or for anything else. This is no different. And so it doesn't get as far as I know that the internet is capable of going, but Gaddam and Ogas underline just how far men and women are willing to go to unearth some of these desires, and the results are very lewd. They're frightening to understand that, but in all honesty, anyone who's been online for longer than 10 minutes understands, doesn't see this as a surprise. There's a reason why this was revolutionary in its writing in 2011, but here over 10 years later, it's not, because we've fallen even further than this book indicates. Kind of my last point is their conclusions about this tend to be more secular. So the conclusions of Gaddam and Ogas are the fact that men and women have this limitless potential for our romantic impulses, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Everyone's got their ick, everyone's got their particular interests, and we should all be understanding of each other. This book is meant to be a umbrella that we're all able to fit into and say everyone's got their thing, let you do you, love is love, all this very loosey-goosey modernism. And I don't know whether that's what the authors attempted to get at in their writing, but that's definitely the impression I got. And where I'm coming from as a Catholic that at least has a basic understanding of my faith, I would hope, is none of the information that Gaddam and Ogas came out with in this book is really revelatory when you think about it from the Judeo-Christian faith. So we've always known that there's a difference between men and women. We've always understood that men tend to respond to things visually, and that women require more than that. They require emotional stability. They require physical stability. They require much more on behalf of men than just what a man looks like in his appearance. So if you look at the Bible and how we interpret that as Catholics, as Christians, even Jews, we understand the difference between men and women. We understand that they require different things and want different things from each other, and it requires some give and take in their relationship with each other. Another thing the Bible understands that's no surprise, that this book shouldn't have surprised anyone in the Catholic Church, is that the extent of human depravity, the depths that human beings are willing to go to satisfy certain impulses does literally no bounds, because we have what Catholics call concupiscence, a tendency to sin. And sin is quite literally a funnel. It starts wide and relatively shallow, and it narrows into something that's quite literally a pit that you cannot get out of. We understand that sin is very much like a fish hook that Satan hooks into you and just pulls you down. So the fact that human beings are capable of not just looking up the most horrible things imaginable, but also taking part in, being complicit in, watching and doing some of the most horrible things imaginable. We look through the scope of history, even outside of sexual content or anything like that. Even when you get into acts of war and acts of violence and betrayal, the Bible has plenty of this content in there. Where we understand that human beings are capable of quite literally anything, because we have that concupiscence. We have that impulse to sin, and that sin gets deeper and darker the longer we stay in it, the longer we entertain those impulses. So the Catholic Church would have acknowledged the same facts that Sai Gaddam and Ogi Ogas have uncovered in their 2011 book, but the only thing that the Catholic Church would have argued on, or at least in my opinion, is the fact that these weren't uncovered in 2011. We've always known them from the very beginning of history. And also that this isn't a reason to celebrate each other's differences in our impulses and what we want, but it's a reason why we actually need to be more hyper aware of where our impulses could potentially take us and to restrain them. I think this book, from a Catholic perspective, is more of a call for us to restrain our base instincts, our base impulses to do what we know is morally wrong, and to do our best to put a leash on it through acts of prayer, acts of service, acts of fasting, and most importantly out of all this, to see each other not as pieces of flesh to use for our entertainment, not as these kind of hippy-dippy other spirits that we can unify with and celebrate our similarities and impulses and ignore our differences in those impulses. We should really see each other as images of God. We should see each other as temples of the Holy Spirit, of people that are made and created intimately in the divine image of our Creator. And that should give us pause before we see each other as objects to exploit for our own personal pleasure. We should see them as people that we should cherish, as other souls who we have a responsibility to care for. And if they choose to debase themselves by following their impulses, we should have that instinct to at least do our best to encourage them to move from that path of sin. So I get that's kind of that might be seen as the fuddy-duddy interpretation of this book. And I know I've talked very euphemistically about this book. This is a book I was very uncomfortable doing a book review of. It's not the kind of interview or not the kind of book review that I typically do. This is the first time I've ever done a live video of. But nonetheless, I think the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to the books I read I should review. I should let the public know what I think about what I thought about them, my raw thoughts, especially something like this where it is very much thought-provoking and it doesn't always bring the best thoughts to mind. So if you like this video, feel free to subscribe. It's from Book Club. Feel free to support the channel. That's how we're able to get all these books, bookshelves, lighting, all that stuff. Thank you to all the subscribers. I hope you enjoyed this first live episode. It probably wasn't my best work, but like all things, you get better with repetition. So I hope to do more live episodes soon. Sorry it came out so late, but again, especially with the more mature content of this book, I wanted to keep it on the later side when typically more mature eyes would be on it anyway. So I'm Mike Hernandez. This is Rumble Book Club. Thanks for watching. I'm going to read something. Thanks for watching, y'all. Now if I can figure out how to turn this off, because this is my first time doing a live episode, so this is where I show my age and how incredibly old I am. So I'm going to search all around the screen like I'm 85 years old. So thanks for watching, guys.